I want to bring in Congressman John Garamendi. He's a Democrat from California and a member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, good to see you.
Good afternoon.
You are, right, are you still one of those lawmakers who does want to see the interpreters, questioned by your committee?
Well, I don't think we're ever going to hear from the interpreter, but what we have to hear from is the president. What did he agree to? I think all of our heads are spinning. This is the most incredible week, I guess actually following on previous incredible weeks. The President of the United States sat down with an adversary who is actively engaged today in trying to disrupt the 2018 elections and also continues to engage today in hacking into our vital infrastructures, the electrical grid, and on and on. There is a cyber war going on, and we have heard zero, nothing, nada from the president about this other than would or wouldn't. I mean, this is just not right. This is a very, very dangerous situation, and to invite Putin back to the United States, to sit him down in the White House and literally kowtow to him is unacceptable. It is simply unacceptable.
So we're hearing on the global stage dribblings coming from Russia. They're leading the narrative on what may have been discussed, what may have been agreed upon. Is it your feeling that the White House is now putting its energies into an upcoming, a Part 2 meeting in the fall, somewhere around midterm elections, and we may never hear anything concrete? We may never hear details coming from the White House about what happened last week.
Well, what we have heard from the Russians is deeply disturbing. There's talk about the American continuation of pulling out. What exactly was agreed to in Syria? There's talk about some sort of a referendum in Ukraine. All of these things are terribly important and, frankly, very disturbing. And I'll give you one more example. When you hear from the Secretary of
State who says, it's good, it is good that they had dialogue, but then through the spokesperson with the White House that nothing was concretely agreed upon. What do you worry about with all of that language?
Everything. Everything. I'll give you a specific example. The Republicans in the Senate and the House are pushing to complete the National Defense Authorization Act. This is the annual $700 billion legislation that tells the military what equipment it has, what it needs for everything from Eastern Europe to the war in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as dealing with the terrorism organizations around the nation, our national defense, the issues of missile defense, the issues of nuclear armaments. All of those things are in there, and presumably, at least from the Russians, all of these things were discussed. Do we need to modify in any way the National Defense Authorization Act to pull back or to increase our presence in any one of these areas? We do not know. And yet the Republicans want to wrap all of this up. It is not right. It is not the way Congress should act, and we must and we should have information. The President and Pompeo have given us zero, nothing, only the Russians.
So the U.S. Senate has unanimously put in protections in place to make sure that a former U.S. ambassador or any U.S. diplomat would not be handed over to the Russians, for grilling, questioning, etc. What other protections do you believe could be legislated at this juncture, not knowing about what details did take place, what agreements may have transpired during that meeting? Can there be any other protections legislated?
Well, that's precisely what I'm saying with regard to the National Defense Authorization Act. We may need to write into it, not just a resolution by the Senate, but write into actual law a bill that the President will absolutely have to sign.
But do you see that happen immediately?
He cannot.
Is that something that can happen immediately, or are we talking long term?
Yes. No, it can happen. It can happen this next week because the conference committee is in process, at least according to the Republicans, finalizing it and putting it on the House floor this coming week. We don't need to have this thing done tomorrow. It doesn't have to be done until October the 1st. We absolutely need to know, and yes, maybe we do need to write into it that no, Mr. President, you cannot turn over our diplomats to Russia, and no, we're not going to allow the Russians to come here and question Mueller. We're not going to do that. That, if it takes a law, then we could do it in the National Defense Authorization Act, along with dozens, if not hundreds of other things that are apparently in process of being discussed between Putin and the president. We don't know.
What does your gut say about why the White House would publicly say, by way of its Secretary of State, that there is an upcoming meeting between Putin and Trump, without details of what happened in Helsinki, and that this meeting would happen at the White House this fall? How do you answer why is all this happening?
Well, for Secretary Pompeo, he is trying to deal with a very erratic, unstable, and unpredictable boss, the President of the United States, Mr. Trump. And so he's doing his very best to be a good soldier, as he was. And, okay, I understand that. But that is not a good reason for America and for the Congress to simply acquiesce. It is inexplicable why the President, in the face of the terrible turnout or the terrible results of the Helsinki Summit, that the President would march right back into that field in the face of the fact that Russia is continuing at this moment, according to the National Defense Director, Mr. Coates, continuing to interfere in the American election, which is just 3.5 months or 4 months away. And the President is sitting down with the man that is doing that? It makes no sense whatsoever. We were concerned going into the Helsinki Summit, and keep in mind that it is not clear that the President fully supports NATO. Montenegro, a member of NATO, the President literally threw Montenegro under the bus, and then having to extract Montenegro from that terrible situation where the President said, well, maybe we wouldn't defend Montenegro.
It seemed like he did make it clear where he stood on that, only to then make it unclear by trying to clarify that perhaps he might be behind NATO and Montenegro. All right, Congressman John Garamendi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Anytime, Frederica.
A day.